In the 41st millennium, gods are not myths. They are cancers that feast on the soul of reality itself. The Imperium worships a corpse emperor who devours 1,000 psychers daily to maintain his deathless vigil. The ruinous powers twist entire star systems into their playgrounds of excess, mutation, bloodshed, and despair. Faith here is not comfort. It is a weapon, a shield, and a prison. But what happens when something falls into this nightmare that has already murdered its gods? What happens when the 41st millennium meets a man who has made deicide his life's work? The forge world of Garast Prime died screaming, not from Xenos invasion, not from heretical uprising. The planet's death came from the sky itself, a wound in reality that bled colors with no names, a tear that howled with voices that predated language. The warp storm materialized without warning above the northern manufactorums, and from its center something fell. He crashed through 17 levels of industrial infrastructure, each impact shattering ferrocrete and pulverizing machinery worth more than 100 human lives. Servitors exploded into component parts as shockwaves rippled outward. Plasma conduits ruptured, bathing entire sectors in radioactive fire. By the time his body struck the foundry floor of sub-level Tertius 9, 3,000 workers had already died in the cascade of destruction. Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, the god of war who had murdered Olympus and humbled Asgard, lay motionless in a crater of his own making. Steam rose from his scarred flesh. The ashen remnants of divine wrath that had clung to him for lifetimes mixed with the toxic atmosphere of the forge world. Around him, coolant mixed with blood, mortal blood, weak blood, blood that meant nothing to gods, but everything to the Imperium that demanded its workers' sacrifice. His eyes opened, grey, cold, aware. The pain hit him immediately, not the physical agony of the fall, which his body had already begun healing, but something deeper, something wrong. His divine essence, the spark of godhood torn from Olympus and tempered in the frozen north of Midgard, flickered like a candle in a hurricane. The very air here resisted him. Reality itself felt hostile, layered with a psychic pressure that scraped against his consciousness like broken glass. He forced himself to his knees, then to his feet. The Leviathan axe materialized in his right hand, frost forming instantly on its blade despite the foundry's oppressive heat. The blades of chaos remained coiled at his sides, and for the first time in centuries, they felt eager, hungry. The chains that bound them to his flesh, chains forged in the fires of Olympus's deepest hell, vibrated with an unfamiliar resonance. Where? His voice was gravel and winter wind. The question died on his lips as his senses expanded outward. This was not Midgard, not even a realm he recognized. The sky, what little he could see through the shattered ceiling levels above, was wrong. It carried a sickly amber hue, choked with industrial smog and something else. Something that writhed at the edge of perception. The very fabric of this place screamed with the weight of suffering, an endless chorus of agony that made even his hardened soul recoil. Alarms wailed throughout the Manufactorum complex. Red emergency lighting bathed everything in the color of arterial spray. He heard them then. Footsteps, hundreds of them, moving with military precision. Voices shouting in a language that his divine nature slowly, painfully began to interpret. Heretical incursion, sub-level Tertius 9. Warp signature, unlike any recorded pattern. All units converge, lethal force authorized. Kratos' grip tightened on the Leviathan axe. Through the smoke and industrial haze, figures emerged. Men, but wrong. They wore armor of dull crimson and grey, each suit a baroque nightmare of rivets and Gothic ornamentation. Their weapons, crude, heavy things that looked like crossbreeds between rifles and rocket launchers, were already trained on him. Behind their helmets, he sensed no fear, only fanaticism. Unidentified entity. The lead soldier's voice crackled through an external vox speaker. You stand in violation of the God Emperor's sacred domain. Identify yourself or be cleansed in his holy fire. God Emperor. The words triggered something primal in Kratos, a muscle memory of rage, of thrones toppled and pantheons broken. His fingers flexed. Spartan rage simmered just beneath his skin, ancient fury seeking release. But he had learned patience. Atreus had taught him that much. I am no enemy, Kratos said, his accent strange in this place, his words chosen carefully. I did not come here by choice. The soldier's response was to open fire. Lass beams, coherent light weaponized into lethal precision, lanced through the air. Dozens of them, a coordinated volley meant to reduce flesh to ash and bone to powder. Kratos moved, not with the blinding speed of his full divine power, but fast enough. The Leviathan axe swept in a wide arc, frost trailing behind it. Where beam met blade, light refracted into harmless scatter. His other hand caught 2 more shots with the bracer on his forearm, the divine metal absorbing energies that would have vaporized mortal flesh. He closed the distance in 3 strides, axe already in motion. The first soldier's rifle split in half. Then his torso followed, a clean diagonal cut that separated ceramite armor as easily as cloth. The second soldier fired point blank. Kratos took the shot on his shoulder, felt the beam sear through skin, smelled his own burning flesh. The pain was trivial. His response was not. The blades of chaos uncoiled with the sound of damned souls screaming. Chain and hellfire blades struck like serpents, wrapping around the second soldier's weapon and yanking it, and him, forward into a devastating headbutt that crushed helmet and skull together. A third soldier lunged with a crackling power sword. Kratos caught the blade in his bare hand, divine flesh resisting the disruption field long enough for him to drive the Leviathan axe through the man's chest. 10 seconds. 15 dead soldiers. The rest began to retreat, their formations breaking as the reality of what they faced overcame their conditioning. Kratos stood among the corpses, breathing steadily, blood and coolant mixing at his feet. The blades of chaos writhed in his grip, their eternal flames burning brighter here than they had in decades. That wrongness, that hunger, it was growing stronger. Above him, through the shattered levels, he heard something else approaching. Heavy, massive, accompanied by hymnal chanting that made his teeth ache. This world, this place of suffering and endless war, had noticed him, and it was sending something worse than soldiers. Kratos planted the Leviathan axe in the ground and waited. He had killed gods. He had toppled pantheons. Whatever this twisted reality threw at him, he would meet it as he had met everything since Sparta, with rage, discipline, and the absolute refusal to bow. The ghost of Sparta had arrived in the 41st millennium. The Chaos gods, ancient and terrible beyond mortal comprehension, would soon learn what their predecessors had already discovered. Kratos was the wrong prey to hunt. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions and impossible warriors, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the Dark Millennium, and you'll want to see what happens when Godslayer meets God Devourers. The chanting grew louder. Something enormous descended through the wreckage toward him. Kratos's eyes narrowed, grey and merciless as a winter storm. Let them come. The thing that descended through the shattered manufactorum levels was not a machine, though machinery comprised half its mass. It was not a man, though human flesh still clung to portions of its frame. It was a space marine dreadnought of the Forge Lord's chapter, a walking tomb that housed Brother Sergeant Validas, entombed within adamantium and ceramite after his body had been broken beyond even Astartes healing. The war machine crashed through the final level with hydraulic grace, landing 50 meters from Kratos with enough force to crack the foundry floor. It stood 4 meters tall, armed with an assault cannon on its left arm and a massive power fist on its right. Purity seals covered every surface, each one inscribed with litanies of hatred toward the mutant, the heretic, the demon. Abomination! The dreadnought's voice boomed through external speakers, layered with mechanical distortion and ancient fury. You bear the taint of the warp. You reek of the ruinous powers. I am Validas, hand of the Omnissiah, and I shall be your executioner. Kratos said nothing. The Leviathan axe remained planted before him. His stance was neutral, relaxed even, the posture of a predator conserving energy before the kill. He studied his opponent with a tactician's eye. Heavy armor, likely resistant to conventional cutting, multiple weapon systems, probably augmented targeting. Slow compared to the gods he'd fought, but durable. The dreadnought's assault cannons spun up with a whine that became a roar. 6 rotating barrels unleashed a storm of mass reactive bolts, each round a small rocket that would penetrate armor before detonating. Hundreds per minute, enough firepower to reduce a tank to scrap. Kratos moved. He didn't run. He surged, the Spartan rage igniting just enough to push his divine body past the threshold of what these weapons could track. The first dozen bolts carved through empty air where he'd stood. The next volley tracked his movement but found only afterimages. He zigzagged between ruined machinery, using cover not out of fear but efficiency. Every bolt wasted was energy the machine couldn't use against him. 20 meters. 15. 10. The dreadnought pivoted with surprising speed, its power fist swinging in a horizontal arc meant to pulverize anything caught in its path. Kratos slid beneath it, the displacement of air from the blow rippling his ashen flesh. The Leviathan axe came up in a brutal upward slash biting deep into the joint where the dreadnought's leg met its torso. Frost spread instantly across the adamantium, metal contracting and cracking under the sudden temperature drop. Validas roared in binary cant and holy fury. The assault cannon swiveled downward, point-blank range. Kratos released the axe, embedded deep in the war machine's structure, and rolled sideways as explosive rounds cratered the floor where he'd been. The blades of chaos uncoiled like living things, wrapping around the assault cannon's barrel cluster. He yanked hard, divine strength against mechanical servos. Something gave with a shriek of tortured metal. The dreadnought's power fist came down like a falling building. Kratos caught it. For 3 seconds, man and machine were locked in pure contest of strength. Kratos's feet cracked the ferrocrete beneath him as he held the massive fist at bay, muscles cording beneath ash-grey skin, divine essence burning through mortal physics. The dreadnought's reactor screamed, pouring more power into its hydraulics. Still Kratos held. Then he twisted. The power fist's wrist joint, designed to withstand artillery strikes, buckled, tore. Kratos ripped the entire assembly free in a spray of hydraulic fluid and sparking cables. He dropped the severed limb and retrieved the Leviathan axe in one fluid motion, spinning to deliver a devastating blow to the dreadnought's torso. The frost-weakened armor split. Internal systems sparked and died. Validas tried to retreat, tried to bring his damaged assault cannon to bear one final time. Kratos didn't allow it. The blades of chaos tore through the war machine's remaining leg joints, dropping it to its knees. The Leviathan axe descended in a two-handed overhead strike that cleaved through the sarcophagus housing, through the ancient warrior within, through the reactor itself. The dreadnought collapsed forward, systems failing, life support flatline. Steam and toxic coolant hissed from dozens of ruptures. Kratos stood over his kill, breathing steadily, already healing from the half-dozen wounds he'd sustained. The blades of chaos pulsed in his hands, their flames dancing higher, brighter. That hunger had grown stronger with combat, with bloodshed. The chains felt warmer against his skin, almost comfortable, almost welcoming. He forced them back into their dormant state, coiling the chains at his sides. Whatever these blades were resonating with in this reality, he couldn't afford to lose himself to them. Not here. Not when he didn't understand the rules of this place. More soldiers poured into the foundry, dozens, then hundreds. But these came in a different formation, led by figures in armor of midnight black and silver. Their weapons were trained but not firing. One of them, distinguished by a rosette symbol and an ornate helmet, stepped forward with a hand raised. "Hold your fire," the figure commanded. The voice was synthesized, but carried absolute authority. "This one is not a common daemon." The figure removed their helmet, revealing a woman's face, scarred, augmented with a bionic eye that whirred and clicked as it analyzed Kratos. Her expression was clinical, cold, the look of someone who'd seen every horror reality, could produce, and remained unimpressed. "I am Inquisitor Casilda Vaughn of the Ordo Malleus," she said, approaching without fear despite the carnage surrounding them. You have destroyed Imperial property worth more than 1,000 worlds. You have killed the Emperor's servants. You bear marks of the warp that I've never encountered in 3 centuries of service. Yet, her bionic eye focused on him with unnerving intensity. You fight like a man, not a demon. You exhibit control, purpose. This intrigues me. Kratos met her gaze. I am no demon. Then what are you? A stranger, lost. Inquisitor Khorne circled him slowly, her retinue maintaining firing positions around the perimeter. She examined the Leviathan axe, the blades of chaos at his sides. The scars that covered his body in a roadmap of violence. Her eye lingered on the most prominent marks, the ghost white ash that would never leave his skin, the permanent reminder of the family he'd murdered in Ares' service. Lost, she repeated. How convenient. A being of immense power, manifesting during a warp storm, claiming ignorance. The usual response would be immediate execution. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could snap her neck before her guards could fire. But I did not reach my position by following usual responses. What do you want? Answers. Cooperation. Possibly your service. Vaughn's human eyes studied him with an intelligence that reminded him uncomfortably of Athena, calculating, seeing layers beyond the immediate. This galaxy is at war, stranger. It has been at war for 10,000 years. The enemies we face are not mere armies. They are gods. 4 of them, born from the collective nightmares of every thinking being in existence. They corrupt, they consume, they laugh at concepts like hope and justice. Something in Kratos stirred. Ancient recognition, muscle memory from lifetimes spent killing the divine. Gods, he said flatly. I know gods. Do you? Vaughn's lips curved in something approximating a smile. These are not gods of myth and thunder, warrior. They are chaos itself given form. Khorne, god of blood and rage. Nurgle, god of decay and despair. Tzeentch, god of change and manipulation. Slaanesh, god of excess and degradation. They have consumed entire sectors, broken the minds of the strongest. Even the Emperor himself, mightiest of all humanity, could only fight them to a stalemate. Kratos thought of Zeus, of Odin, of every pantheon that claimed omnipotence until his blades found their throats. Gods can die, he said. The Inquisitor's smile widened. Can they now? That is a dangerous claim, a heretical claim. Also, she leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Exactly what I wanted to hear. Around them, her retinue shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a younger man in power armor marked with inquisitorial symbols, stepped forward. Inquisitor, this is madness. He's clearly tainted. The proper protocol. Silence, Interrogator Kane. Khorne didn't look away from Kratos. I have hunted demons for 300 years. I know taint when I see it. This is something else, something unprecedented. Her bionic eye clicked rapidly, scanning deeper. He carries warp-touched artifacts, yes, but he is not of the warp. He is not corrupted by it. He is merely touched by it, Kratos finished. These blades, they were forged in my world's underworld, bound to me as punishment for serving a god of war. They hunger for violence. He met her gaze without flinching. But they do not control me. Fascinating. Vaughn straightened. Warrior without a name, you have 3 choices. First, I execute you here. Order this entire sector burned to cleanse any potential contamination, and file a report that will be forgotten in the administratum within a decade. Second, I take you into custody for study, experimentation, and eventual execution once we've learned everything your physiology can teach us. Third, she paused for effect. You accept my bond of service, temporary, limited, with clearly defined terms. You help me understand what you are, where you came from, and whether you can be weaponized against the arch-enemy. And if I refuse all 3? Vaughn gestured to the hundreds of soldiers surrounding them. Then we fight. You'll kill many of us. Perhaps you'll even escape. But you'll be hunted across the entire sector by forces that make what you've seen here look like children with sticks. The Imperium has resources beyond your comprehension, warrior. Stubbornness without equal. Kratos considered this. He was trapped in an unknown reality, his powers compromised, facing an empire that measured its domains in star systems rather than kingdoms. He needed information, time to understand this place. And this woman, this Inquisitor, was offering exactly that, however temporarily. I have conditions, he said. As do I. We'll negotiate terms aboard my ship. Vaughn replaced her helmet and turned to her retinue. Secure the area. Prepare stasis bindings for transport, the kind we use for greater demons, not the standard chains. Something tells me standard won't hold him. She glanced back at Kratos. And pray to the Emperor that I'm right about you, stranger. Because if I'm wrong, I've just unleashed something that could doom this entire subsector. Kratos followed her toward the waiting transport crafts. Behind them, soldiers began the grim work of collecting their dead and cataloguing the destruction. The blades of chaos rested against his back, still warm, still hungry. He had made deals with those who claimed divine authority before. He had served gods who promised him peace in exchange for slaughter. Every time, it had ended in betrayal. Every time, he had been the one to paint the sky red with their blood. This Inquisitor spoke of gods she could not kill, gods beyond mortal reach. Kratos had heard that before too. The inquisitorial vessel. Unrelenting truth was a cathedral carved from adamantium and void steel. 3 kilometers of Gothic architecture that sailed through the poisoned skies of the warp as easily as real space. Kratos stood in an observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, watching the impossible geometries of warp travel fold reality into shapes that defied mortal comprehension. Colors that shouldn't exist bled across the viewport. Distant shapes. If they were shapes at all whole, twisted in ways that hurt to perceive. He'd seen Helheim, walked through Hades itself. This was different. This wasn't death's domain. This was something alive, hungry, and aware of him. The Imperium! Inquisitor Vaughn's voice came from behind him. She'd approached silently, or perhaps he'd been too focused on the view. The warp, the sea of souls. It has many names, all of them insufficient. She stood beside him, her bionic eye dimmed to avoid the view's more maddening aspects. It is the mirror of real space, a dimension of pure psychic energy where thought becomes reality and emotion has physical weight. It is also where they live. The gods you spoke of. Gods, demons, entities. Taxonomy becomes meaningless when dealing with beings born from collective consciousness. Vaughn pulled up a hololithic display from her wrist-mounted cogitator. 4 symbols materialized, each one making Kratos' vision blur at the edges. Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, the ruinous powers, each one sustained by the emotions of every sentient being in the galaxy. Every act of violence feeds Khorne. Every moment of despair nourishes Nurgle. Change and hope feed Tzeentch. Excess and pleasure sustain Slaanesh. Kratos studied the symbols without fear. They are parasites, feeding on what they did not create. An accurate assessment. Vaughn's tone carried approval. But parasites that have existed for millions of years. Parasites that have broken Space Marine chapters, corrupted entire worlds, and waged war against reality itself. The Emperor designed the Space Marines specifically to be resistant to their corruption, genetic engineering, psychological conditioning, faith indoctrination. Even that is not always enough. You want to know if I can resist them. I want to know why you haven't already fallen. Vaughn turned to face him directly. In the 72 hours since we retrieved you from Garast Prime, I've subjected you to 16 different tests. Psychic probes, biological sampling, analysis of those blades you carry. The results are paradoxical. She pulled up another hololithic display, this one showing scan data of the blades of chaos. The chains pulsed with energy signatures that the Imperial sensors struggled to quantify. These weapons are suffused with warp energy, Vaughn continued. Not chaos corruption exactly, but something adjacent. They should be driving you mad, whispering promises of power, showing you visions of glory. That's what warp-touched artifacts do. They seduce, they corrupt, they unmake the soul. But you, she gestured at Kratos with something approaching frustration. You wear them like tools, control them like trained beasts. How? Kratos flexed his hands, feeling the chains shift against his flesh. Because they already did their worst to me. These blades were bound to me as punishment for murdering my own family. I served Ares, a god of war in my world, and in my blind rage, I killed my wife and daughter with these very weapons. The chains cannot be removed. The blades cannot be destroyed. They are my curse, my reminder. He met Vaughn's gaze, and for the first time, she saw the depth of ancient pain behind those grey eyes. Your gods of excess and rage think they can tempt me with power. I have held the power of gods. Your Khorne believes he can seduce me with bloodshed. I have drowned in more blood than all your wars combined. I know what I am. I know what these blades made me. They have no hold because I accepted what they represent." Silence settled between them. Outside, the warp roiled with impossible colors. "That's not quite accurate," Vaughan said quietly. "The blades haven't lost their hold on you. They're gaining it back." Kratos's expression hardened. Vaughan pulled up biological readings, his readings. "Your heart rate increases when you fight. Expected. But it increases again when you sheathe the blades afterward, as if your body craves their continued use. Adrenaline spikes persist for hours beyond normal parameters. Brain activity in your limbic system, the rage centers, shows unusual patterns. You're becoming more attuned to them here, in this reality, than you likely were in your own. The warp strengthens them," Kratos said, understanding dawning. "The warp resonates with them, because here, rage and violence aren't just emotions. They're fuel for actual gods. Every time you kill, you're feeding something. Every drop of blood spilled in anger doesn't just vanish. It echoes into the Imperium where Khorne sits on his throne of skulls and grows stronger." Vaughan's mechanical eye focused with disturbing intensity. "You're a god killer who carries weapons forged in divine wrath. In any other reality, that makes you dangerous. In this one, you're either the perfect weapon against chaos or the perfect vector for its corruption." Before Kratos could respond, klaxons screamed throughout the ship. Red emergency lighting flooded the observation deck. Vaughan's cogitator erupted with urgent notifications. "Report!" she barked into her vox bead. "Inquisitor, we're detecting a massive warp incursion on the port side." The voice belonged to her interrogator, Kane. Geller Fields, holding but under extreme stress. Signature is Emperor Preserve Us. It's Greater Demon Class. Multiple contacts. They're manifesting inside the peripheral corridors. Vaughan was already moving, drawing a bolt pistol that hummed with contained power. "Secure the bridge. All available combat personnel to defensive stations. Activate the ship's sacred wards." She glanced back at Kratos. "It seems our passengers disagree with my assessment of you." Kratos pulled the Leviathan axe from the magnetic clamp at his back. "Where?" "Starboard cargo bay, 17 decks down. That's where they'll manifest first. Furthest from the bridge, closest to the ship's reactor. Standard demon tactics." She was running now, Kratos keeping pace easily. "If they breach the reactor, the Geller field collapses. If the field collapses while we're in the warp, the entire ship becomes a feeding ground for demons." They reached a wide corridor where her retinue was already assembling. 20 soldiers in power armor, each one bearing weapons that crackled with holy energy. Plasma rifles, power swords, flamers blessed by tech priests. At their center stood an enormous figure in Terminator armor, his armor painted the bone white of a space marine chaplain. "Brother Chaplain Mordecai," Vaughan acknowledged, "your timing is providential." The chaplain's skull-faced helmet turned toward Kratos. When he spoke, his voice was a cathedral bell wrapped in thunder. "Inquisitor, you bring an unproven asset into combat against the archenemy?" "I bring a man who killed a Forge Lord's dreadnought with his bare hands. Your concerns are noted and dismissed." Vaughan loaded a magazine into her bolt pistol, each round inscribed with prayers. "The demon signatures?" Bloodletters, Khorne's foot soldiers. Mordecai hefted his Crozius Arcanum, the weapon already sparking with power. Perhaps 3 dozen, led by something larger. A Bloodthirster, if the augur readings are accurate. Kratos knew none of these terms, but he understood the essential truth. Servants of the war god were coming. The same war god whose domains included rage and violence, domains the blades of chaos resonated with. As if in response to his thoughts, the blades grew warm against his back, eager. They descended through the ship in forced march, passing through corridors lined with prayer strips and purity seals. Servitors, those horrible fusions of human and machine, worked to reinforce bulkheads. Through the walls, Kratos could hear it, screaming, the wet sound of tearing metal, laughter that wasn't remotely human. The cargo bay doors were already breached when they arrived, torn open from the inside, edges still glowing red from unnatural heat. Beyond lay a space the size of a coliseum, filled with storage containers and machinery. And between them, moving with predatory grace, were things from nightmare. They stood 8 feet tall, skinned in crimson flesh that wept blood from every pore. Their faces were canine mockeries, all teeth and savage hunger. Each one carried a blade that looked forged from brass and bone, edges burning with hellfire. They moved in packs, hunting the scattered crew who'd been trapped when the breach occurred. Bloodletters, Demons of Khorne. At the cargo bay's far end, something far larger reared up. It stood 3 times the height of the lesser demons, wings of shadow spreading wide, a whip of flame in one hand and an axe the size of a man in the other. Its skin was the red of arterial spray, its eyes twin infernos of pure hatred. Horns curved from its skull like a parody of a crown. The Bloodthirster turned its gaze directly to Kratos, and when it spoke, reality itself seemed to crack. God Killer. The voice was 1,000 battlefields screaming in unison. The blood, God has marked you. You reek of slaughter, of murdered divinity. Khorne welcomes you to his service. Brother Chaplain Mordecai began a prayer chant, his voice layered with psychic weight that pushed back against the demon's presence. Vaughn's retinue opened fire. Bolter rounds and plasma blasts tearing into the lesser demons. Several bloodletters exploded into ichor and warp energy, banished back to the Imperium. But Kratos only had eyes for the Bloodthirster. I serve no gods, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Bloodthirster laughed, a sound that made metal weep and souls crack. You serve rage, you serve violence, you have always served Khorne, even in your ignorant realm. Now you will serve willingly, or you will serve as broken meat on his altar. The blades of chaos erupted from their resting position without Kratos consciously summoning them. They uncoiled like living serpents, chains wrapping around his forearms, blades igniting with hellfire that burned brighter than ever before. The hunger he'd felt since arriving in this reality crystallized into something almost overwhelming. For a single moment, Kratos felt it. The pull, the promise. Khorne offered him purpose. Endless war, glorious battle, the satisfaction of combat without end, without guilt, without the burden of memory. He thought of Faye, of Atreus, of the man he'd fought so hard to become. No. The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of defiance that had toppled pantheons. Kratos charged. The Bloodthirster roared and met him head-on. When God-killer and demon collided, the cargo bay erupted into violence that would echo into the warp itself and catch the attention of something ancient, terrible, and very, very interested. On a throne made from the skulls of champions and gods, Khorne leaned forward for the first time in millennia. This mortal was different, resistant, defiant, perfect. The Bloodthirster's axe descended with enough force to split a tank. Kratos met it with the Leviathan axe, frost meeting hellfire, in a detonation of conflicting energies that sent shockwaves rippling through the cargo bay. Containers weighing tons shifted from their moorings. Lesser demons caught in the blast radius simply ceased to exist, their essence scattered back into the warp. Kratos held the block for 3 heartbeats, divine muscles straining against demonic strength. Then he twisted, redirecting the greater demon's momentum past him. The Bloodthirster's axe carved a trench through the deck plating deep enough to see the level below. Kratos didn't waste the opening. The blades of chaos struck like vipers, wrapping around the demon's extended arm, chains biting deep into crimson flesh. He yanked hard, pulling the massive creature off balance, and drove his shoulder into its midsection with enough force to crack ceramite. The Bloodthirster staggered backward, shocked. These mortal vessels were not supposed to move with such strength, were not supposed to hurt it. "Impossible!" it snarled, ichor dripping from where the chains had bitten through its hide. "You are mortal, finite. I am eternal fury, given form." "I have killed eternal before," Kratos said, and struck again. Around them, the battle raged. Brother Chaplain Mordecai waded through bloodletters like a holy avalanche, his Crozius Arcanum crackling with enough power to unmake demon flesh with each impact. The Space Marine's prayers weren't just words, they were weaponized faith that caused the lesser demons to writhe and scream. Inquisitor Vaughn fought with cold precision, each bolt round a sanctified execution, each movement economical and lethal. Her retinue formed defensive positions, flamers scorching away demon ichor before it could corrupt the ship's hull. But the Bloodthirster only had attention for Kratos. It came at him with renewed fury, axe and whip working in tandem. The whip, a lash of pure flame, cracked across his chest, searing through skin and muscle. Pain exploded across his torso, but Kratos had been tortured by gods before. Pain was old currency. He rolled beneath the follow-up axe swing and came up inside the demon's guard, the Leviathan axe biting deep into its knee joint. The Bloodthirster roared and backhanded him with enough force to send him crashing through 3 storage containers. Kratos tasted blood, felt ribs crack, and immediately begin healing. The Spartan rage was building now, that ancient fury demanding release. He could feel it pressing against the cage of discipline he'd built over centuries, the monster he'd fought so hard to control. The blades of chaos pulsed against his flesh, feeding on the rage, amplifying it. "Use us," they seemed to whisper. "We are stronger here. Let go. Remember what you were. He forced himself to his feet, spitting blood. The Bloodthirster advanced, each footstep cracking the deck. Behind it, the tear in reality that had spawned it pulsed with sickly light, more demons beginning to claw through from the other side. "Kratos!" Vaughn's voice cut through the chaos. "The rift is expanding. If we don't close it within the next 3 minutes, we'll be overrun." Mordecai planted himself between the rift and the ship's deeper corridors, a one-man bulwark. "I can hold the breach, but only if the greater demon falls." The Bloodthirster laughed, the sound making reality crack at the edges. "You hear that, God Killer? Your new allies need you. They depend on you, just like your Spartan brothers once did, just like your family did." It leaned closer, eyes burning with malicious intelligence. "We know you. We have always known you, Kratos of Sparta, the ghost who murdered his blood, the warrior who slaughtered Olympus because he could not slaughter his guilt." Each word was a barb designed to dig into old wounds, to trigger the rage that had defined him for so long. Khorne sees your truth. You were never the hero, never the protector. You were wrath incarnate, painted in ash and regret. Here, in the 41st millennium, you could embrace that truth. No more pretending. No more holding back. Just pure, honest violence. Kratos' hands tightened on his weapons. The rage was so close now, a heartbeat away from consuming everything. The blades burned hot enough to hurt, their chains seeming to tighten around his forearms as if urging him forward. He thought of Atreus, teaching him to hunt, to think before striking, to be better. "You are wrong," Kratos said, his voice steady despite the fury threatening to break free. "I was that man. I wore that rage like armor, and it cost me everything." He met the Bloodthirster's burning gaze without flinching. "I am not that man anymore." The Bloodthirster's expression shifted, confusion flickering across demonic features. "What?" "I said no." Kratos channeled the Spartan rage not into mindless fury, but into focused, devastating precision. The Leviathan axe blazed with frost that seemed to burn, Aita, energy from Jotunheim responding to his will. He threw it, not at the Bloodthirster, but at the rift itself. The weapon spun through the air, trailing streams of frozen power, and embedded itself in the tear's center. Reality screamed. The rift began to frost over, its edges crackling with ice that shouldn't exist in the warp. The Bloodthirster roared in genuine alarm. "No! You dare!" Kratos recalled the axe. It ripped back through the demon's torso on its return journey, carving a channel of devastation through warp flesh. The Bloodthirster staggered, ichor pouring from the wound. But it was already healing, demonic essence knitting back together. Not fast enough. Kratos closed the distance in 3 steps. The blades of chaos lashed out, not as extensions of rage, but as tools wielded by a master. They wrapped around the greater demon's axe arm, chains binding, pulling, controlling. The Leviathan axe struck again, this time at the demon's other knee. The Bloodthirster crashed to the deck, forced to kneel. For a moment, man and demon were face to face. Khorne will not forget this insult, the Bloodthirster hissed. You have been marked God Killer. The Blood God does not release his claim. Sooner or later, you will... Kratos drove the Leviathan axe through its skull, frost exploding outward to freeze the demon's head solid. Then he ripped the axe free, shattering the frozen mass into crystalline fragments. The Bloodthirster's body convulsed once before dissolving into ash and fading light, banished back to the Imperium. The rift collapsed, with a sound like reality sighing in relief. Silence crashed over the cargo bay. The remaining bloodletters, leaderless and cut off from warp reinforcement, fell quickly to Mordecai and Vaughn's forces. Within minutes, nothing remained but corpses, ichor, and the acrid smell of demon flesh burning away. Kratos stood in the center of the carnage, breathing heavily. The blades of chaos cooled against his back, their hunger temporarily sated but not satisfied. He could still feel Khorne's attention on him, distant but aware, like a predator marking prey for later. Emperor's mercy, Vaughn breathed, approaching cautiously. Her armor was scorched, and blood, her own and others, painted her carapace. I've seen Space Marine captains fall to Bloodthirsters, entire companies consumed, but you? It is dead, Kratos said flatly. What matters now? Brother Chaplain Mordecai removed his helmet, revealing a face etched with scars and augmetic implants. When he spoke, there was grudging respect beneath the suspicion. You resisted. The blood god's temptation is nearly irresistible, yet you turned away from it. Either you possess a will of adamantium, or something else protects you. Nothing protects me. I protect myself. Spoken like a true son of the Imperium, Mordecai said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. But tell me this, stranger. When you struck down the greater demon, did you feel it? The pull? The whisper that promised endless battle, eternal glory? Kratos met the Space Marine's gaze. I felt it. I denied it. For now, Mordecai replaced his helmet. But Khorne is patient. He has eternity to break you, and you, for all your strength, are not eternal. The chaplain departed to oversee damage control, leaving Kratos alone with the Inquisitor. Vaughn studied him with that unnerving combination of human and bionic perception. You're not telling me something, she said quietly, about those blades, about how you really control them. Kratos looked down at his hands, scarred, ash-pale, marked by centuries of violence. In my world, I bound myself to service through them. The debt was paid in blood, the blood of my family. Here, they feel different, hungrier, like the debt might never be paid. Because here, rage is infinite, Vaughn said. There is no end to war in the 41st millennium, no final battle, no ultimate victory, just endless conflict grinding slowly toward the heat death of reality itself. For weapons forged in wrath, this place is paradise. She paused. And damnation. Before Kratos could respond, her cogitator chimed. She checked the display, and her expression hardened. We're receiving a priority distress call. Naval encryption. Imperial Guard garrison on the world of Vulcan's Reach. They're under siege by a Chaos warband. Initial reports suggest World Eaters, Khorne's most devoted mortal followers. She looked up at him. The garrison won't last 3 days. Extraction would take 2 weeks. They're requesting immediate Astartes support that we don't have. Why tell me this? Because I'm about to do something monumentally stupid. Vaughn holstered her bolt pistol. I'm offering you a choice. We can continue to my fortress on Scintilla. I study you, test you, determine if you're an asset or a threat. Safe, controlled, or... She gestured to the cargo bay's ruins. We divert to Vulcan's Reach. You see this galaxy's war firsthand. You face Khorne's mortal champions, former space marines driven mad by the blood god's gifts. You prove whether your defiance is genuine or temporary. And if I fail, then I execute you myself and pray the Emperor forgives my hubris. Vaughn's expression was utterly serious. But if you succeed, if you can stand against the World Eaters and maintain your control, then perhaps you truly are what I suspect, a weapon that chaos cannot claim, a god killer, immune to gods. Kratos thought of the Bloodthirsters' words, of Khorne's distant attention, patient and hungry. He could hide, could study this new reality from safety, could take the cautious path. But caution had never killed a god. Take me to this Vulcan's Reach, he said. I would see these warriors who worship rage. Vaughn smiled, not with warmth, but with the satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. Then we set course immediately. Emperor, preserve us all. She activated her Vox speed. Navigator, alter heading, destination, Vulcan's Reach, Helican subsector, maximum warp speed. As the unrelenting truth shifted course, diving deeper into the Imperium toward a world at war, Kratos returned to the observation deck. The warp stretched before him, infinite and hostile. Somewhere in its depths, he could feel Khorne watching, waiting. The blood god thought time was on his side, thought Kratos would eventually break, would embrace the rage that had defined him for so long. Khorne had never met someone who'd already destroyed themselves once and rebuilt from the ashes. Had never encountered a will forged in the guilt of divine mistakes and tempered by the determination to be better. The god of war was about to learn what every pantheon before him had discovered too late. Kratos didn't break. He broke others. The chains at his sides grew warm, but he ignored them. Let them hunger. Let Khorne scheme. When the time came, he would show this dark god the same truth he'd shown Zeus, Odin, and every other deity who'd thought themselves beyond mortal reach. Gods could bleed, gods could fall, and Kratos had eternity to prove it. Vulcan's Reach burned under a sky the color of infected wounds. The world had been a mining colony once, 17 billion souls extracting promethium from beneath rust-red soil. Now it was a slaughterhouse where Khorne's faithful came to worship through slaughter. The unrelenting truth broke from the warp at the system's edge, its Geller fields flickering with the strain of an aggressive translation. Through the observation deck, Kratos watched the planet grow larger, a sphere wrapped in storm clouds that pulsed with unnatural lightning. Even from orbit, he could sense it. The psychic weight of violence, millions of deaths bleeding into the warp like an open wound. The World Eaters arrived 6 days ago. Inquisitor Vaughn briefed him as they prepared for deployment. Around them, her retinue armed themselves with the grim efficiency of soldiers who expected to die. A warband led by Khorne the Betrayer, one of Khorne's most favored champions. He was once a space marine, a hero of the Imperium during the Great Crusade. Now he's something else, a walking avatar of rage who hasn't known a moment of peace in 10,000 years. She pulled up a hololithic display showing a figure in crimson armor covered in brass icons and dried blood. The image was grainy, captured from a dying soldier's helmet cam. The figure moved through a squad of Imperial Guard like a force of nature, each swing of his chain axe ending lives. Khorne has killed more souls than some plagues, Vaughn continued. He doesn't stop, doesn't sleep, doesn't negotiate. He simply kills until nothing remains, then moves to the next battlefield. His warband follows the same creed: murder everything, offer the skulls to Khorne, repeat until the galaxy drowns in blood. Kratos studied the image. He is what I might have become, if I had never stopped. Exactly, Vaughn said quietly, which is why I'm sending you down there. Consider it a mirror. Either you'll prove you've truly mastered your rage, or you'll show me that control was always an illusion. Brother Chaplain Mordecai entered the armory, his Terminator plate freshly blessed with sacred oils. The drop zone is 12 kilometers from the garrison's last known position. Orc atmospheric interference will force us to land outside the combat zone and advance on foot. Expect heavy resistance. The World Eaters have spent days hunting survivors. They'll be frenzied, lost to the butcher's nails. The what? Kratos asked. Mordecai's expression darkened. Neural implants, archaeotech from the dark age of technology, perverted by chaos. They suppress everything except aggression, fear, mercy, reason, all burned away, leaving only rage. The implants were supposed to make warriors fearless. Instead, they made monsters. Khorne was among the first to receive them. He hasn't known clarity in 10 millennia. Kratos thought of the ghost of Sparta he'd once been. Blind rage given flesh, caring for nothing but the next kill. He'd needed no implants. His fury had been organic, nurtured by divine manipulation and his own guilt. But he'd found a way back. These World Eaters never would. They are already lost, he said, beyond saving. Beyond redemption, Mordecai agreed, which makes them perfect servants of the blood god, and perfect enemies for you to prove yourself against. The Thunderhawk gunship descended through Vulcan's Reach's tortured atmosphere like a falling blade. Inside the troop compartment, Kratos sat surrounded by Vaughn's retinue and a squad of Mordecai's battle brothers, 5 space marines of the Silver Skulls chapter, each one a towering warrior in power armor. They'd watched him board with suspicion that bordered on hostility. He was an outsider, unaugmented, bearing weapons that reeked of the warp. One of them, Brother Sergeant Castiel, finally spoke. Inquisitor Vaughn claims you killed a bloodthirster, alone. I did. And you resisted its corruption. I did. Castiel leaned forward, his helmet's eye lenses glowing red in the compartment's dim light. Understand this, stranger. If you show even a hint of taint, if those cursed blades of yours flare with chaos's touch, I will execute you before you can draw breath to protest. I don't care what the Inquisitor says. I don't care what you've supposedly accomplished. My duty is to the Emperor and the Imperium, not to anomalies who play at being heroes. Kratos met his gaze without flinching. I have killed men for less threatening words. Then you'll have your chance to try. Castiel settled back, servo motors whirring. Because I'll be watching every move you make. The Thunderhawk struck ground with a shudder that would have broken a mortal vessel. The assault ramp dropped, and Kratos' senses were immediately assaulted by Vulcan's reach, all its horror. The smell hit first. Burning promethium mixed with decaying flesh, overlaid with something sharper, more chemical. The air tasted of copper and ash. The sky roiled with storms that had nothing to do with weather, lightning striking in patterns that suggested malign intelligence. And everywhere, bodies. They carpeted the ground in layers. Imperial Guard soldiers with their laser guns still clutched in death-locked grips. Civilians who'd tried to flee. PDF troopers who'd made last stands at makeshift barricades. All of them bore the same wounds, brutal, excessive butchery that spoke of killers who found joy in the act itself. Emperor's mercy, one of Vaughn's soldiers whispered, then immediately doubled over to vomit. Kratos had seen battlefields before, had created them. But even he felt something stir at the sheer waste of it. This wasn't war. It was extermination as art form, slaughter elevated to religious devotion. The garrison was here, Mordecai said, his auspex painting hololithic markers in his helmet's display. 1,000 meters northeast. I'm detecting life signs. 47. And approximately, he paused, recalibrating. 300 world eaters between us and them. 300 Chaos Space Marines, Castiel said flatly, against 6 Astartes, 1 inquisitorial retinue, and an unknown factor. He looked at Kratos. We're going to die here. Then we die well, Mordecai replied. But we die advancing. For the Emperor. For the Emperor, the other Space Marines echoed. They moved through the ruins in combat formation. The city, if it could still be called that, was a labyrinth of collapsed buildings and burning wreckage. Everywhere, evidence of the World Eater's passage. Bodies arranged in grotesque patterns. Blood used as paint for 8-pointed stars. Skulls stacked in pyramids that reached 3 stories high. Kratos moved at the formation's edge, senses hyperextended. He could feel them before he saw them. The psychic pressure of beings so consumed by rage that they'd become rage incarnate. The blades of chaos grew warmer against his back, resonating with something in the air. The attack came without warning. A World Eater dropped from a ruined building's 3rd floor, ceramite boots cratering the ground. He wore armor the red of arterial spray, every surface covered in brass icons of Khorne. His helmet had been removed, or perhaps it had been shattered in some long-ago battle, revealing a face that was more skull than flesh, the skin stretched tight over augmetic implants. His eyes were blood red, filmed with something that might have been madness or enlightenment. In his hands, a chain axe roared to life, teeth spinning fast enough to blur. "Blood! For the blood god!" the World Eater screamed and charged. Brother Sergeant Castiel met him, power sword igniting. Transhuman warrior met chaos-corrupted warrior in a clash that sent shockwaves rippling across the street. They were evenly matched, Castiel's discipline and centuries of training against the World Eater's absolute lack of restraint and pain receptors burned away by the butcher's nails. But the World Eater wasn't alone. They came from every direction, crimson nightmares pouring from the ruins like blood from an opened vein. Dozens of them, each one a walking monument to murder. They didn't coordinate, didn't use tactics. They simply attacked with single-minded fury that made standard Imperial doctrine useless. The Silver Skull's Space Marines formed a defensive circle, their bolters roaring. Mass reactive rounds found targets, detonating inside power armor, but the World Eaters barely slowed. Those that fell were trampled by their brothers, and those that couldn't reach the Space Marines turned on each other, chain axes carving through friendly armor with the same enthusiasm they showed to enemies. Vaughn's retinue fought desperately, flamers scorching the ground, but it was like trying to hold back an ocean with a wall of sand. They were being overwhelmed. Kratos moved. The Leviathan axe materialized in his hand, and he threw it with every ounce of divine strength. The weapon became a spinning wheel of frost and death, carving through three World Eaters before embedding itself in a fourth's chest. He recalled it immediately, the axe ripping back through the same trajectory, doubling the carnage. A World Eater pivoted toward him, chain axe already descending. Kratos sidestepped, caught the World Eater's wrist, and twisted. Even corrupted by chaos, the laws of leverage still applied. The elbow joint inverted with a crack, and Kratos followed up with a headbutt that shattered the World Eater's faceplate. The Leviathan axe took his head a moment later. Two more charged him simultaneously. The blades of chaos uncoiled, their chains singing through the air. One blade wrapped around a World Eater's leg, yanking him off balance. The other took the second World Eater across the throat, hellfire burning through ceramite and flesh alike. Kratos pulled both chains taut, then crossed them, the blades scissoring through armor and bone. He fought like water flowing downhill, inevitable, adaptable, relentless. Every World Eater that came at him found death waiting. The Spartan rage simmered beneath his control, lending him speed and strength without consuming his reason. This was the balance he'd learned with Atreus. Use the fury without being used by it. But with every kill, the blades of chaos burned hotter. A World Eater larger than the others emerged from the carnage. His armor was ancient, pre-Heresy design, covered in 10,000 years of accumulated gore. On his shoulder pad, Kratos recognized the symbol from Vaughn's hololithic display, a snarling hound's head wreathed in brass. This was Khorne the Betrayer. "Finally," Khorne said, his voice surprisingly calm despite the butcher's nails' torment. "Someone worth killing." He hefted his weapon, a massive chain axe called Gorechild, its teeth still spinning from its last victim. "I can smell the god blood on you. You're the one who denied Khorne. made the blood god curious. Kratos said nothing, simply shifted his stance. Khorne laughed, the sound utterly devoid of humor. I was like you once, tried to control it, thought discipline and duty could chain the rage. He tapped the side of his head, where crude surgery scars spoke of the butcher's nails implantation. Then I learned the truth. Rage isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be set free. You are a slave, Kratos said. Nothing more. And you're lying to yourself. Khorne's eyes, completely red, the whites long since drowned in blood, fixed on the blades at Kratos' sides. Those weapons know it. Can feel them calling out, can't you? They want to burn, want to kill. You're just delaying the inevitable. Sooner or later you'll let go, and when you do... Khorne charged mid-sentence, Gorechild screaming through the air. Kratos met him head-on. Axe met axe in a shower of sparks and displaced air. The impact would have pulverized a mortal's arms. Kratos held firm, feet planted, divine strength matching chaos-fueled rage. They broke apart, circled, struck again. Gorechild carved through the air fast enough to create vacuum pockets. The Leviathan axe left trails of frost that made the air crack with cold. Khorne fought with 10,000 years of experience, every strike a killing blow, every movement economical despite the fury driving him. But his attacks followed patterns, predictable chains of violence that the butcher's nails forced him into. Kratos had no such limitations. He feinted high, struck low, caught Khorne across the knee with enough force to buckle ceramite. The betrayer stumbled, but used the momentum to spin into a horizontal slash that would have bisected a tank. Kratos rolled beneath it, came up inside Khorne's guard, and drove the Leviathan axe into the World Eater's side. Frost exploded outward, and for the first time, Khorne's expression showed something other than rage. Pain. Impossible, Khorne hissed. The nails burned it all away. Pain is a teacher, Kratos said, ripping the axe free. You forgot the lesson. Around them, the battle was turning. The Space Marines had rallied, forming a spearhead around Mordecai. Vaughn's retinue laid down supporting fire. The World Eaters, leaderless and increasingly frenzied, began turning on each other as much as their enemies. Without Khorne's presence holding them together, they were just rabid beasts. Khorne looked at his warband falling apart, looked at Kratos, and laughed again, this time with genuine mirth. You think you've won? This changes nothing. I'll heal. I'll return. I've died 100 times and come back every time. That's what serving Khorne means. Eternal war, eternal rage, eternal purpose. He pointed Gorechild at Kratos like an accusation. You'll learn. The blood god is patient. And those blades of yours? He grinned, blood leaking from his teeth. They're already teaching you. Every fight you use them more, need them more. Soon you won't remember what it's like to fight without them. Before Kratos could respond, Khorne triggered something on his armor. Reality tore open behind him. A small warp rift, just large enough for one. Until next time, Godkiller, Khorne awaits our reunion. He stepped backward into the rift and vanished. The remaining World Eaters, seeing their champion retreat, followed suit, either escaping through hastily opened portals or dying beneath the Space Marines' wrath. Within minutes, silence fell over the battlefield. The kind of silence that comes after storms, heavy with the weight of what had been lost. Kratos stood among the dead, the blades of chaos still burning in his hands. He looked down at them and realized Khorne had been right about one thing. They were warm, comfortable. They'd felt good during the fight, like extensions of his will rather than cursed artifacts. That terrified him more than the battle had. "The garrison," he said to Mordecai, forcing the blades back into their resting state. "We continue." They found the survivors huddled in the ruins of a cathedral. 47 Imperial Guard soldiers, 3 priests, and 1 commissar with a bolt pistol in one hand and an empty bottle of Amasec in the other. When they saw the Space Marines, several broke down weeping. When they saw Kratos, ash-pale and covered in World-Eater blood, they fell silent. The commissar approached on unsteady legs, saluted Mordecai, then turned to Kratos. "Who? What are you?" "Someone passing through," Kratos said. "He's a weapon," Inquisitor Vaughn said, stepping forward. "A very dangerous weapon that I'm still deciding how to use." The commissar laughed, hollow and broken. "Well, use him soon, because there are 17 more warbands heading toward this sector. The whole subsector's falling apart. The Imperium's losing ground it took millennia to claim." He looked up at the infected sky. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is how it ends. Not with a bang, but with a billion little battles we're too exhausted to win. Kratos followed his gaze upward. Somewhere beyond that sky, beyond the warp's roiling madness, Khorne sat on his throne of skulls, watching, waiting. The blood god had marked him as prey, as potential, as entertainment for an entity that measured time in geological epochs. But Khorne had made one critical mistake. He assumed Kratos would eventually break, would eventually fall. Every god made that assumption. Every god learned too late that Kratos didn't break. He broke everything else first. The blades of chaos pulsed against his back, warm and eager. He could feel Khorne's attention like pressure behind his eyes. The blood god was offering him a choice. Embrace the rage and gain power beyond imagining, or resist and be ground down by the endless war of the 41st millennium. Kratos chose a third option, the one gods never anticipated. He would take what this reality offered, the combat, the challenge, the sharpening of his skills against worthy opponents. But he would not bow, would not serve, would not become another champion dancing on chaos's strings. Instead, he would learn, would grow stronger, would understand this new cosmos's rules. And then, when he was ready, he would do what he'd done to every pantheon before, reach up into the heavens and drag the gods down to his level. Khorne wanted eternal war. Kratos would give him something better, eternal defeat, a god-killer loose in a universe of gods, refusing to die, refusing to submit, systematically dismantling everything the ruinous powers had built. The 41st millennium thought it had seen endless war. It had no idea what was coming. The unrelenting truth departed Vorkan's reach, carrying 47 survivors and one unanswered question. What do you do with a man who can fight gods but refuses to serve them? Inquisitor Vaughn spent the 3-week journey to the scintilla system wrestling with that question. She'd watched Kratos' combat footage a dozen times, analyzed every strike, every decision, every moment where he might have lost control. The data was maddeningly consistent. He fought with brutal efficiency, channeled rage without being consumed by it, and showed no signs of corruption despite wielding weapons that should have damned him 100 times over. She found him in the observation deck again, staring into the warp as if he could see through its chaos to something beyond. "You're looking for a way home," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am looking for understanding," Kratos replied. "In my world, I knew the rules, knew how gods functioned, how they could be killed. Here," he gestured to the impossible colors swirling beyond the viewport. "Your gods are different. They exist in multiple places simultaneously, feed on emotions that span the galaxy. I cannot simply climb a mountain and drive my axe through their skulls." "No," Vaughn agreed, joining him at the window. "You can't. The Chaos Gods aren't beings in the traditional sense. They're concepts given form. Khorne is rage. You can't kill rage any more than you can kill mathematics. You can only deny it, starve it, refuse to feed it." She paused. "Which is exactly what you've been doing." "It is not enough." Khan escaped. "The World Eaters will regroup. The war continues." "The war always continues. That's the nature of the 41st millennium. There is no victory, only survival. The Imperium has been holding the line for 10,000 years, losing ground one planet at a time, sacrificing billions to buy humanity one more generation." Vaughn's expression was unreadable. "You come from a reality where problems could be solved, gods could be killed, empires could be toppled. This reality doesn't work that way. The enemy is infinite, the war is eternal, and the best we can hope for is to die standing rather than kneeling." Kratos turned to face her. "You do not believe that." "Excuse me? If you believed the war was unwinnable, you would not fight. You would surrender, join chaos, accept the inevitability of defeat." He studied her with those grey eyes that had witnessed the death of pantheons. "But you continue. You test me, study me, search for weapons against enemies you claim cannot be beaten. You hope, even if you will not admit it." Vaughn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried weight it hadn't before. "I brought you here, to my ship, to that battlefield, because I needed to know if you were real, if a being could exist who was genuinely immune to chaos, who could wield its weapons without being wielded in return. Because if such a being existed, it would mean..." She trailed off. "It would mean the gods are not invincible," Kratos finished. "Heresy of the highest order. The kind of thought that gets inquisitors executed." She smiled without humor. "But yes, exactly that. The Imperium teaches that only the Emperor can stand against chaos. That mortal will, no matter how strong, will eventually break. You are living proof that might be a lie. And lies, even comfortable ones, are dangerous things to believe." Before Kratos could respond, alarms screamed throughout the ship. Red emergency lighting flooded the observation deck. Vaughn's cogitator erupted with urgent notifications. "Report!" she barked into her vox bead. "Inquisitor, we're detecting a massive warp phenomenon directly ahead." The navigator's voice was pitched with barely controlled terror. "It's not a storm. It's not a rift. It's a door. Something is opening a pathway through the Imperium, and it's opening right in front of us." Kratos felt it before he saw it, a pressure building in his chest, his divine essence recoiling from something fundamentally wrong. The warp beyond the viewport began to contract, folding in on itself in geometries that hurt to perceive. Colors drained away, replaced by a singular, overwhelming red. The red of fresh blood. The red of rage given physical form. At the phenomenon's center, something massive began to take shape. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a demon. It was a throne, carved from 1,000,000,000 skulls, each one belonging to a warrior who died in glorious combat. And sitting upon that throne, radiating power that made reality crack at its presence, was something that defied comprehension. Khorne. Not an avatar, not a greater demon. The actual, literal god of blood and skulls, manifesting a fragment of his infinite consciousness to personally address the mortal who dared to defy him. The entity was too vast to process completely. Kratos' mind could only pass fragments. Muscles like mountains, armor forged from rage itself. A face that was every warrior who'd ever died screaming, superimposed and terrible. Eyes that burned with the heat of collapsing stars. When Khorne spoke, his voice was the sound of every battle ever fought, layered into a single, universe-shaking declaration. Kratos of Sparta, God-killer, breaker of chains. The words hit like physical force. Across the ship, systems failed. Servitors collapsed, their augmetic brains unable to process the psychic weight. Several of Vaughn's soldiers screamed, blood leaking from their ears. Even Brother Chaplain Mordecai, rushing onto the observation deck in full Terminator armor, staggered under the pressure. Kratos alone remained standing, feet planted facing the blood god without flinching. "You have amused me," Khorne continued, "denied me, interested me. No mortal has done this in 10 millennia. Not since the false emperor bound himself to his golden throne." The throne of skulls drifted closer, defying physical laws, existing simultaneously in the warp and real space. Kratos could see individual skulls now, recognize warriors from 1,000 cultures, 1,000,000 wars. Some were human. Many were not. All had died in combat, their final moments of fury feeding the god before him. "I offer you a choice, God-killer. The same choice I have offered countless champions before you, but never with such sincerity." Reality tore open beside the throne. Through the rift, Kratos could see a battlefield beyond imagining. An entire dimension where war was eternal, where warriors fought and died and rose again for the pure joy of combat. No politics, no manipulation, no false causes, just the purity of struggle, refined to its essence. "Serve me willingly, and I will grant you what you truly desire. Endless war against worthy opponents. No more pretending to be the gentle father. No more suppressing your true nature. Just battle forever against enemies who can match your fury. A second rift opened, showing something different. A vision of the 41st millennium drowning in blood. Kratos at its center, unstoppable and unchained. The blades of chaos blazing with their full power. No longer a curse, but a blessing. Worlds falling before him. Gods trembling. The ultimate warrior elevated to the ultimate weapon. Or refuse and watch as this galaxy grinds itself to ash around you. Watch as every ally you make falls to chaos or death. Watch as your discipline, your control, your precious self-restraint accomplishes nothing against the infinite tide. The throne moved closer still, until Khorne's presence filled the viewport completely. The pressure was unbearable. Even Vaughn had collapsed to her knees, blood streaming from her nose. Mordecai was praying in Gothic, his voice steady but strained. The ship itself groaned, hull plating cracking under the psychic weight. Choose, Kratos, God Killer. Will you finally accept what you are? Or will you cling to the lie that you can be anything other than what your blades have made you? The blades of chaos erupted into flame without Kratos summoning them. The chains writhed against his flesh like living things, burning hot enough to sear even his divine skin. They wanted him to accept, wanted him to embrace what Khorne offered. For the first time since binding them, Kratos felt their pull as something almost irresistible. He thought of Sparta, of standing atop a mountain of bodies he'd created, crowned in ash and glory, empty of everything except the rage. He thought of Faye, of her hand in his, steady and certain, pulling him back from the abyss one day at a time. He thought of Atreus, of teaching his son to be better than him, to break the cycle of godslayers becoming gods becoming tyrants. Kratos reached down and grabbed the blade's chains with his bare hands. The contact sent agony lancing through his nervous system. They'd never burned this hot, never fought his control this fiercely. But he held them, forced them down, made them remember who was in control. No, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the observation deck with absolute certainty. I have walked the path you offer. I know where it leads. I will not serve you. I will not serve any god. I am done kneeling. Khorne's laughter was an earthquake-given voice. Such arrogance, such magnificent defiance. Very well, God Killer. I accept your refusal. The throne began to fade, reality reasserting itself as the blood god withdrew his direct presence. But understand this, your choice has consequences. I do not release my claim. You bear my mark now. Every demon, every champion, every warband in this galaxy will know your scent. They will hunt you, test you, break themselves against your will, until finally, inevitably, you break in return. The rifts closed, one by one. And when that day comes, when you finally surrender to what you truly are, I will be waiting, patient as the grave, eternal as rage itself. The throne vanished, the pressure lifted. The warp returned to its normal chaos, which felt almost peaceful in comparison. Across the unrelenting truth, personnel began picking themselves up, assessing damage, treating the wounded who'd been caught in the psychic backwash. Kratos remained at the viewport, the blades of chaos slowly cooling against his back. He'd won, defied a god face to face, refused power that would have elevated him beyond mortal limitations. So why did he feel like he'd just painted a target on his back? Emperor's mercy! Khorne gasped, forcing herself upright with visible effort. That was... I've never... In 300 years of service... She couldn't finish the thought. Mordecai approached, removing his helmet. His face was ashen, but his eyes held something new when he looked at Kratos. Respect. You faced the blood god himself and refused him. No Space Marine chapter can claim such a feat. No hero of the Imperium has stood so firm against direct divine attention. He clasped Kratos' shoulder, a gesture of brotherhood from a warrior who'd thought him tainted hours before. Whatever else you are, stranger, you are no servant of chaos. What I am, Kratos said quietly, is a man trying not to become a monster again. Then you've come to the right galaxy, Khorne said, her voice regaining its usual steel. Because this place specializes in turning men into monsters. The fact that you're fighting it, she smiled, genuinely this time. That makes you rarer than any weapon I could forge. They reached Scintilla 3 days later, the ship limping into port with half its systems damaged by Khorne's manifestation. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the inquisitorial network, enough that when Kratos disembarked, he found himself surrounded by agents, acolytes, and even several inquisitors who'd come specifically to see the god-killer who refused Khorne. But Kratos had no interest in fame or recognition. He'd been paraded as a champion before, had worn the laurels of victory only to discover they were chains in disguise. Instead, he sought out Khorne in her private chambers within the fortress. "What happens now?" he asked. Khorne looked up from her desk, where she'd been filing reports that would likely be disbelieved for centuries. "That depends. I could release you, give you a ship, some resources, let you find your own way in this galaxy. Or..." She pulled out a data slate, its screen showing a galactic map marked with dozens of red indicators. "You could work with me, not as a servant, not as a weapon to be pointed and fired, as a partner. To what end? To prove that chaos can be fought, not just resisted, not just survived, actually fought. You've shown me that weapons exist which cannot be corrupted, that will can triumph over divine temptation. If I can study you, learn from you, understand what makes you immune, perhaps I can help others resist, save worlds that would otherwise fall, turn the tide in a war the Imperium has been losing for 10,000 years. Her eyes blazed with the fervor that had made her an inquisitor. "Change the game, Kratos. That's what I'm offering. A chance to do here what you did in your world, break the gods' hold on reality." Kratos was quiet for a long time, considering. He could refuse, strike out on his own, try to find a way home. But Khorne's parting words echoed in his mind. Every demon, every champion, every warband would hunt him. He'd be a target whether he chose to fight or flee. And if he was going to be hunted by gods, he might as well hunt them back. "I accept," he said, "but on my terms. I will not bow to your emperor. I will not swear oaths I do not believe in. I fight because I choose to, not because I'm commanded." "Agreed." Vaughn extended her hand. "Welcome to the Ordo Malleus, Kratos. May the Emperor—" She caught herself, smiled. "May whatever keeps you whole continue to do so, because we're going to need every advantage we can get." They shook hands, Inquisitor and Godkiller, forming an alliance that would echo through the subsector for decades to come. Outside the fortress, the 41st millennium continued its slow collapse into darkness. Chaos warbands ravaged worlds. Xenos empires pressed at the Imperium's borders. The Emperor's light flickered on its golden throne, growing dimmer with each passing century. But in one corner of that darkness, something new had emerged. A man who'd killed gods. A warrior who'd faced the ruinous powers and refused their gifts. A god-killer loose in a universe of gods, wielding weapons that should have damned him, but couldn't. Because he'd already been damned once, and crawled back from the abyss through sheer force of will. Khorne watched from his brass throne, patient and amused. The god-killer thought he'd won, thought refusal was victory, but the blood god had eternity to teach him otherwise. Sooner or later, every warrior fell to rage. It was simply a matter of time. What Khorne didn't understand, what no god who'd faced Kratos ever understood until too late, was that time was not on the gods' side. Every battle Kratos survived made him stronger. Every temptation he resisted hardened his will. Every god who tried to break him only taught him new ways to break them in return. The Chaos gods thought they'd gained a new plaything, a mortal to torment and corrupt over millennia, until he finally, inevitably fell. They'd actually gained something far more dangerous, a reminder that gods were not eternal, that power could be challenged, that even beings born from the collective unconscious of quadrillions could bleed. Kratos stood on Scintilla's battlements, looking up at stars that burned with unnatural colors. Somewhere up there, Khorne waited, and somewhere beyond Khorne, 3 other gods plotted and schemed and prepared to test this new element in their eternal game. Let them come. He'd spent lifetimes learning one crucial lesson. Gods were only immortal until someone proved otherwise. The 41st millennium was about to learn what every pantheon before it had discovered too late. Kratos didn't break. He broke gods. And he was just getting started. In the end, the 41st millennium gained something it had lost millennia ago. Hope. Not the false hope of propaganda or the desperate hope of prayers whispered in the dark. Real hope. The kind forged in defiance, tempered by discipline, proven through impossible odds. Kratos didn't save the Imperium. One man, no matter how powerful, could never save a civilization spanning millions of worlds. But he showed that resistance was possible, that chaos could be denied, that will, properly applied, could stand against gods. Inquisitor Vaughn's reports would circulate through the Ordo Malleus for centuries. Most would dismiss them as exaggeration or heresy, but a few, those who'd seen too much, fought too long, lost too many battles against the ruinous powers, would read her words and wonder. If one man could resist Khorne's direct temptation, what else might be possible? The Space Marines who fought alongside Kratos would carry stories back to their chapters. Of the ash-skinned warrior who wielded cursed blades without corruption, who fought with rage but never surrendered to it, who looked at the Imperium's brutal theology and chose his own path. Some chapters would declare him heretic, others would debate his nature for decades. A few would quietly wonder if the Emperor's way was truly the only way. But the greatest impact was on chaos itself. For the first time in 10 millennia, the ruinous powers faced something genuinely unexpected. A mortal who understood them, recognized their patterns, and refused to dance to their design. Khorne especially was intrigued. The blood god had eternity to wear down one stubborn human. But what if that human couldn't be worn down? What if will could triumph over divine inevitability? It was a question that would haunt the brass citadel for ages to come. As for Kratos, he'd found something in the 41st millennium that he'd thought lost forever. A war that mattered. Not conquest, not vengeance. A genuine struggle against powers that would enslave all reality if left unopposed. It wasn't the peace Faye had wanted for him, but perhaps it was the purpose Atreus had hoped he'd find. He would fight. Not as the god's champion, not as anyone's weapon, but as himself. The ghost of Sparta reborn in an era that desperately needed ghosts, phantoms that haunted the nightmares of those who thought themselves beyond fear. The blades of chaos still burned against his back. Khorne's mark still branded his soul. The war was far from over. In truth, it would never be over. But for the first time since falling into this twisted reality, Kratos understood his role. He wasn't here to win. The 41st millennium couldn't be won, but it could be fought, could be defied, could be forced to remember that even in an age of gods and demons, mortals with sufficient will could stand their ground. And if the Chaos Gods wanted to test that will, let them send their champions, their Daemons, their temptations and corruptions. Kratos had killed Zeus, had humbled Odin, had broken the cycle of god-slayers becoming gods. 4 more gods would simply mean 4 more lessons in mortality. The Emperor protects, the Imperium preached. But in one corner of that vast Imperium, a different truth was being forged. Sometimes mortals protect themselves, and sometimes that's enough to shake the very heavens. The Emperor protects. More stories await.